Clint Eastwood was born Clinton Eastwood Jr. on May 31, 1930, in San Francisco's St. Francis Hospital at 6:35 p.m., weighing 11 pounds 6 ounces, so big the nurses nicknamed him Samson. His father, Clinton Sr., was a bond salesman who could charm anyone. His mother, Ruth, was a housewife who sang hymns while ironing. The Depression hit 6 months later. Clinton Sr. lost his job, took any work he could find, and the family moved constantly. Redding, Sacramento, Hayward, Piedmont, always chasing the next paycheck. By the time Clint was 10, they had lived in 14 different houses. He learned early that nothing was permanent except hunger and the California sun that made him squint. He grew tall fast, 6'4" by 17, but skinny, quiet, and shy. At Piedmont High, he was a C student who played basketball, swam on the team, and spent most afternoons at the piano playing boogie-woogie. Girls terrified him. He barely spoke. Teachers called him the Ghost. He worked after school digging swimming pools for 50 cents an hour, driving a lumber truck in the summers, and never once thought about acting. Movies were for rich kids in Los Angeles. Korea broke out on June 25, 1950. Clint was 20, drifting through Oakland Junior College, pumping gas, and playing piano in bars for tips. The draft notice came in January 1951. He tried everything to get out, claimed flat feet, they measured and said no, bad eyes, the doctor laughed, dependent parents, his father was working again, nothing worked. On March 15, 1951, he was inducted at the Oakland Army Terminal and put on a bus to Fort Ord. Basic training was hell for a 6'4" kid who had never taken orders. The drill sergeants rode him mercilessly. "Hey, Hollywood, you gonna cry?" He ran the obstacle course with a full pack, cleaned latrines with a toothbrush, and learned to hate the Army with every fiber of his being. One day, the company commander, Captain William Schachter, discovered Clint could swim like a fish. Overnight, he was yanked from the rifle companies and made a swimming and water survival instructor at the post pool. While his buddies marched in the rain and shipped out to Korea, Clint spent the next 18 months in swim trunks, teaching terrified draftees how to float, tread water, and abandon ship. He hated the cushy job. He felt like a coward. He requested combat duty 3 times and was refused every time because the Army needed swimming instructors more than riflemen. He taught hundreds of men how to survive if their ship was torpedoed, how to swim through burning oil, how to stay alive in freezing water. He never told them he had dodged the real war. On October 3, 1951, he was hitching a ride home on a Navy Douglas AD-1 Sky Raider out of Seattle. The plane developed engine trouble off Point Reyes. The pilot ditched in the Pacific. Clint and the pilot swam 2 miles through 50-degree water and shark-infested kelp beds to shore. Clint's swimming lessons had just saved his own life. He never forgot it. He was discharged honorably in February 1953 as a corporal with the National Defense Service Medal, the Korean Service Medal, he never left California, and a squint that had become permanent from years staring at the sun across swimming pools and the Pacific. He came home to Los Angeles, enrolled at LA City College on the GI Bill, and started hanging around studios because a buddy said they paid extras $25 a day. He took bit parts in Revenge of the Creature and Tarantula, got a contract at Universal for $75 a week, and learned to act by watching Gary Cooper and John Wayne. He never told anyone he had been a swimming instructor. He never told anyone he had dodged Korea. He just squinted harder and kept his mouth shut. Clint Eastwood spent the war teaching men how to survive water while secretly believing he had failed the real test. Every time he narrowed those eyes on screen, every time he stood silent in the sun, he was still that tall, shy kid who had run from the draft and learned the hard way that sometimes the hardest battles are the ones you never fight. October 3, 1951 was a clear Wednesday afternoon at Whidbey Island Naval Air Station, Washington. Corporal Clint Eastwood, 21 years old, 6'4", 185 pounds of quiet resentment, had hitched a ride south on a Douglas AD-1 Sky Raider, a single-seat Navy dive bomber with an extra jump seat crammed behind the pilot.
Clint was heading home to Los Angeles on weekend leave, wearing civilian jeans and a leather jacket because he hated the Army uniform even on his days off. The pilot was Lieutenant Francis Coleman, a friendly, regular Navy officer who liked the tall, quiet soldier who never complained. They took off at 14:17, climbed to 4,000 feet, and headed south along the coast. 40 minutes out, over the Pacific off Point Reyes, the engine coughed once, then quit. No fire, no explosion, just silence. Coleman radioed a mayday, turned the plane toward land, and told Clint, "We're going in the water. Get ready to swim." The Sky Raider hit the ocean nose first at 120 knots. The impact tore the canopy off. Freezing salt water slammed into Clint's face like a fist. The plane sank in seconds. Clint kicked free of the jump seat, lungs burning, and shot to the surface. Coleman was already there, bleeding from the forehead, but conscious. The water was 52 degrees. Survival time without a life vest? Maybe 20 minutes. Clint had no life vest. Neither did Coleman. They were 3 miles from shore in a heavy swell with a riptide pulling them north. Clint remembered every lesson he had taught at Fort Ord. Stay calm, conserve energy, swim parallel to the beach until you break the current. He told Coleman, "We swim side stroke, slow and steady. Don't fight the rip." Coleman was injured and weakening fast. Clint looped an arm under the pilot's shoulders and began the longest swim of his life. 2 miles of kelp beds, sharks, and 12-foot swells. Every stroke felt like lifting a car. The cold numbed his legs first, then his arms. He kept talking to Coleman, anything to keep him conscious. "Think about your wife. Think about a cold beer. We're not dying out here." At one point, a shark fin circled them. Clint kicked at it and screamed until it veered away. After 2 hours and 10 minutes, they finally felt sand under their feet. They crawled onto a deserted beach north of Point Reyes, collapsed, and vomited seawater. A rancher found them an hour later, half dead, wrapped them in horse blankets, and drove them to the hospital at Hamilton Air Force Base. Doctors said another 15 minutes in the water and they both would have been gone. Clint spent 3 days recovering, refused all interviews, and never told his parents the full story. The Navy gave him a letter of commendation he threw in a drawer. He went back to Fort Ord, finished his swimming instructor tour, and never swam in the ocean again. That night in the Pacific changed him forever. He never feared death after that. He had already looked it in the face and outlasted it. The squint got deeper. The voice got quieter. The silence got heavier. When he finally stood in front of a camera years later, directors noticed something. This tall, quiet man didn't need to act tough. He had already survived something most men couldn't imagine. Clint Eastwood spent 2 hours in 52-degree water saving a man's life and never told a soul. Every time he stared down a villain on screen, every time he walked away from an explosion without looking back, he was still that 21-year-old corporal swimming through hell with another man's life on his shoulders. The crash didn't make him famous. It made him unbreakable.
Clint Eastwood was discharged from Fort Ord on February 3, 1953, as a corporal with a duffel bag, a dishonorable-looking mustache, and exactly $187 in his pocket. He moved back in with his parents in Piedmont, enrolled at LA City College on the GI Bill, and spent most nights playing piano in Oakland bars for tips and free beer. He was 23, 6'4", still squinting like he was staring at the sun, and had no idea what to do with the rest of his life. One night in 1954, a friend named Jack Jing dragged him to a party at CBS Television City. A casting director named Bob Raisin saw the tall, quiet ex-soldier leaning against a wall and said, "You ever thought about acting?" Clint laughed and said no. Raisin told him to come in for a screen test anyway. Clint wore his only suit, too short in the sleeves, and read a line from a script about a gas station attendant. The camera loved the voice, the silence, the squint. Universal Pictures offered him a stock player contract,
$75 a week, 40 weeks a year, no guarantees. He signed in May 1954. They immediately changed his name to Clint Eastwood, he hated it at first, and put him in acting, diction, and fencing classes with 60 other kids who all looked like movie stars. Clint looked like a lumberjack who had lost a fight with a sunburn. The studio executives called him the ugly one behind his back. His first role was one line in Revenge of the Creature. Hey, look at that thing. His second was one line in Tarantula. Hey, Professor. He was on screen for a total of 42 seconds in 1955 and earned exactly $1,200 for the year. The studio sent him to wardrobe to get fixed. They capped his teeth, trimmed his eyebrows, and tried to teach him to smile. Clint refused. He kept the chipped tooth, the squint, and the voice that sounded like gravel soaked in bourbon. They put him in B-Westerns, Francis in the Navy, Lady Godiva of Coventry, where he played lab assistants and bug-eyed cowboys. Critics called him wooden. Directors called him uncooperative. The front office called him expendable. In 1956, Universal dropped his option. He was 26, broke, and married to Maggie Johnson, a swimsuit model he had met on a blind date. They lived in a one-room apartment in Sherman Oaks. Clint dug swimming pools again, this time for $1.10 an hour, and drove a garbage truck at night to pay the rent. He told Maggie, "If nothing happens by the time I'm 30, I'm quitting." In 1958, a CBS executive named Bill Dozier saw a screen test Universal had buried and cast him as Rowdy Yates, second lead in a new Western series called Rawhide. The network wanted Tab Hunter or James Dean. Dozier wanted the tall, quiet guy who didn't act like anyone else. Clint signed for $750 an episode, moved his family to a small house in the valley, and spent the next 7 years riding horses, squinting at the sun, and learning how to be a leading man, while the world still thought he was just a tall extra with a funny voice. He hated the pretty boy role of Rowdy Yates. He fought the writers, fought the directors, and fought the network to make the character tougher, quieter, meaner. By season 4, he was directing episodes himself, uncredited. He learned every camera angle, every lighting trick, every editing cut. He watched John Ford Westerns on 16mm projectors until 3 a.m. He saved every dime. He bought a small ranch in Carmel with cash, and he waited. Clint Eastwood spent 4 years being told he was too tall, too ugly, too quiet, too strange for Hollywood. He spent 4 years proving them wrong one episode at a time. Every time he narrowed those eyes on Rawhide, every time he let the silence do the talking, he was still the kid who had dug swimming pools for a living and sworn he would never let anyone tell him who he could be again.
In the spring of 1964, Clint Eastwood was 33 years old, a television cowboy making $1,500 an episode on Rawhide and bored out his mind. His marriage was rocky, his bank account was decent, and Hollywood still thought of him as the tall kid who couldn't act. Then a cable arrived from Rome. An Italian director named Sergio Leone, who had never made a Western, was shooting a low-budget remake of Kurosawa's Yojimbo in Spain. The original star, Henry Fonda, had turned it down. Charles Bronson called the script the worst piece of crap I've ever read. James Coburn wanted too much money. Leone offered the role to Clint Eastwood for $15,000 total, plus a used Mercedes. Universal loaned him out like a piece of furniture. Clint read the script on the plane to Madrid and hated it. No dialogue for the first 20 pages, just a stranger riding into a desert town. He landed in Rome, met Leone, who spoke no English, and communicated through an interpreter and hand gestures. Leone wanted him to keep the squint, the silence, the chipped tooth. He wanted him to smoke thin Italian cigars, chew on them instead of lighting them, and wear a flat-crowned hat pulled low. Clint thought it was ridiculous. Leone said, "Trust me." They shot in the Tabernas Desert of Almeria, Spain, in 110-degree heat. The Spanish crew called Clint El Cigarro because he never took the cigar out of his mouth. The poncho he wore was the only one they had. It stank of sweat and horse. The gun belt was too small. The holster rode high on his hip. Everything was wrong by Hollywood standards.
Clint hated every minute. But something happened when the camera rolled. The silence worked. The squint worked. The slow, deliberate way he moved worked. Leone filmed him in extreme close-up, letting the desert and the eyes do the talking. The movie was called Per un pugno di dollari, a fistful of dollars. It cost $200,000 and was finished in 11 weeks. When it opened in Italy in September 1964, it broke every box office record. In America, nobody wanted to distribute it. United Artists finally dumped it into drive-ins in January 1967 as a second feature. It made $14 million. Clint Eastwood, the $75 a week contract player Universal had fired, was suddenly the biggest movie star in Europe. He came home to a changed world. Reporters wanted interviews. Universal begged him back. He refused every offer until Leone called again. 2 more films followed, For a Few Dollars More, 1965, and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, 1966. Together, the trilogy earned over $50 million worldwide on a combined budget of less than $2 million. Clint's fee went from $15,000 to $250,000 plus percentage. He bought a house in Carmel, a Ferrari, and final cut on his next picture. The squint that had gotten him laughed out of casting offices was now on billboards from Tokyo to Paris. The silence that directors had called wooden was now the coolest sound in cinema. The chipped tooth that Universal wanted capped became the trademark of the man with no name. Clint Eastwood had spent 13 years being told he wasn't good enough. In 11 weeks in the Spanish desert, wearing a smelly poncho and a hat that didn't fit, he proved every one of them wrong. The Italian nobody wanted gave him the role that made him a legend. And the squint he had learned staring at the California sun finally found its perfect light.
By 1970, Clint Eastwood was 40, a millionaire, and the biggest movie star in the world thanks to 3 Italian westerns nobody in Hollywood had believed in. He had his own production company, Malpaso, final cut on every picture, and a reputation for being difficult because he refused to smile on cue. He was looking for something new, something American, something that would shut up the critics who still called him the spaghetti cowboy. The script arrived from a young writer named Harry Julian Fink. It was called Dead Right, later Dirty Harry. A rogue San Francisco cop named Harry Callahan hunts a serial killer named Scorpio who is terrorizing the city. The original star was Frank Sinatra. Sinatra injured his hand and dropped out. Paul Newman was offered the role and turned it down because he thought the character was too right-wing. John Wayne turned it down because that's not a role for a real man. The studio went through 6 more names before someone suggested Clint Eastwood. Clint read the script in one night and said yes immediately. He saw Harry Callahan as the logical extension of the man with no name, silent, violent, morally certain, and completely uninterested in what anyone thought of him. He told director Don Siegel, "This guy doesn't give a damn about rules, he just wants the killing to stop." Siegel, who had directed Clint in Coogan's Bluff, understood exactly. They shot in San Francisco in the spring of 1971. Clint wore his own clothes, tweed jacket, checked pants, kept the squint, and improvised the most famous line in movie history. The scene? Harry has Scorpio at gunpoint after the final shootout. Scorpio is laughing, daring Harry to shoot. Clint points the .44 Magnum, clicks the hammer, and says, "I know what you're thinking. Did he fire 6 shots or only 5? Well, to tell you the truth, in all this excitement, I kinda lost track myself. But being this is a .44 Magnum, the most powerful handgun in the world, and would blow your head clean off, you've got to ask yourself one question. Do I feel lucky? Well, do you, punk?" The crew stood silent when he finished. They knew they had just witnessed lightning.
The studio panicked. Executives called it fascist, dangerous, a glorification of police brutality. Critics predicted riots. Warner Brothers considered shelving the movie. Clint told them, "Release it or I'll buy it from you and release it myself." They released it on December 22, 1971. It made $36 million in its first year, equivalent to $270 million today, the biggest hit of Clint's career. Audiences stood and cheered during the final shootout. The line, "Do you feel lucky, punk?" entered the language the same week. Dirty Harry became the highest-grossing film of 1971 and spawned 4 sequels. It changed action movies forever. No more smiling cops, no more happy endings, no more apologies. Critics hated it. Pauline Kael called it fascist medievalism. Roger Ebert called it deeply immoral. Clint didn't care. He told Time magazine, "I didn't make Harry for the critics. I made him for the people who are sick of being afraid to walk their own streets." Dirty Harry made Clint Eastwood the biggest movie star on the planet and gave birth to the modern action hero, a man who doesn't talk much, doesn't follow rules, and doesn't ask permission to do what needs doing. Every squint, every pause, every cold stare in that film came from the same place. The kid who had swum through the Pacific, dug swimming pools for a living, and learned that sometimes the only way to survive is to stop caring what anyone thinks. Clint Eastwood was 41 years old when he pointed that .44 Magnum at the camera and asked the world one question. The world answered with ticket sales, standing ovations, and a new kind of hero. Dirty Harry wasn't acting. He was Clint finally telling Hollywood, the Army, and every doubter who had ever laughed at him exactly how he felt.
By 1978, Clint Eastwood was 48, the biggest box office star in the world, and sick of playing other people's heroes. He had Final Cut, his own company, Malpaso, and enough money to do whatever he wanted. What he wanted was to direct. He had already directed a few scenes on Rawhide, the trailer for the Iger sanction, and an uncredited sequence in Breezy. But in 1978, he took the leap with Every Which Way But Loose. The script was a comedy about a bare-knuckle fighter, Clint, who traveled with an orangutan named Clyde and a girlfriend played by Sandra Locke. Warner Brothers executives laughed when he brought it to them. "You're Dirty Harry. You can't make a monkey movie." Clint told them, "Watch me." He directed it himself, kept the budget at $5 million, shot in 6 weeks, and released it Christmas 1978. The critics slaughtered it. Gene Siskel called it the worst film of the year. Audiences loved it. It made $106 million, over $500 million today, the biggest hit of Clint's career. The studio begged for a sequel. Clint delivered Any Which Way You Can in 1980. It made another $70 million. The man who had once been fired by Universal for having no future had just directed the 2 highest-grossing comedies in Warner Brothers history. He followed with Bronco Billy, 1980, a gentle film about a traveling Wild West show. Critics hated it, audiences loved it, it made money. Then Firefox, 1982, a Cold War thriller where he directed himself stealing a Soviet jet. Critics were mixed, audiences showed up. Then came the one that changed everything. Hunky Tonk Man, 1982. Clint directed and starred as Red Stovall, a dying alcoholic country singer in the Depression who wants one last shot at the Grand Ole Opry. He cast his 13-year-old son Kyle as his nephew. He shot it slow, quiet, and heartbreaking. Critics finally shut up. Roger Ebert gave it 4 stars and wrote, "Eastwood has grown into one of the finest American directors." The film lost money, but Clint didn't care. He had proven he could do more than squint and shoot. That same year, he directed Sudden Impact,
the fourth Dirty Harry film. He gave himself the line, "Go ahead, make my day," which instantly became more famous than "Do you feel lucky?" The movie made $150 million. He was now the only man in Hollywood who could direct a monkey comedy, a children's western, a tearjerker, and a cop thriller, all back-to-back, and make money on every one. He bought a ranch in Carmel, built a soundstage on it, and never looked back. The tall, quiet kid who had once dug swimming pools for a living was now the most powerful filmmaker in the world, answering to no one. Clint Eastwood had spent 25 years being told what he could and couldn't do. In 4 years, he directed 7 films that proved every doubter wrong, made $500 million, and established himself as a director who could do anything: comedy, drama, action, heartbreak. The squint was still there. The silence was deeper. And Hollywood finally understood. The man who had once been fired for having no future had just written his own.
By 1992, Clint Eastwood was 62 years old, the highest-paid actor in the world, and still being dismissed by critics as just a movie star who makes violent westerns. He had been nursing a script for 9 years. He bought it in 1983 from a young writer named David Webb Peoples. The title was The William Money Killings. Clint changed it to Unforgiven. He kept it in a drawer and waited. He told friends, "I'll make it when I'm old enough to play William Money." In the spring of 1991, he finally said yes. He would direct, produce, and star. The budget was $14.4 million. The cast was perfect. Gene Hackman as Little Bill Daggett, Morgan Freeman as Ned Logan, Richard Harris as English Bob, and a 33-year-old unknown named Francis Fisher as Strawberry Alice. Clint cast himself as William Money, a broken, widowed pig farmer and retired killer dragged back into violence for one last job. They shot in Alberta, Canada, in the fall of 1991. Clint was 61, gray-haired, weather-beaten, and moved like a man who had carried too much for too long. He directed with almost no dialogue on set, letting the wind and the silence do the work. He shot in sequence, refused to use a double for the riding scenes, and did the final gunfight in one continuous take. Hackman hated the violence and tried to quit twice. Clint talked him into staying by promising the film would be the end of the Western as we know it. Unforgiven opened on August 7, 1992. Critics, who had spent 30 years calling Clint a fascist, a reactionary, and a one-note actor, suddenly ran out of words. Roger Ebert gave it 4 stars and wrote, "This is the greatest Western ever made, and one of the greatest films." The New York Times called it a masterpiece. It made $160 million worldwide and swept the Oscars. Best Picture, Best Director, Clint's first, Best Supporting Actor, Gene Hackman, Best Editing. Clint Eastwood, the tall, quiet kid who had been fired by Universal in 1955 for having no future, stood on the Academy Award stage at age 62, holding 2 Oscars, and said only 9 words. "This is for all the directors who ever believed." He dedicated the film to Sergio Leone and Don Siegel, the 2 men who had taught him everything. He never made another traditional Western again. He didn't need to. Unforgiven was the final word. The squint that had once gotten him laughed out of casting offices had just won the highest honor in cinema. The silence that directors had called wooden had just spoken louder than any speech. The man who had once dug swimming pools for $1.10 an hour had just proven that sometimes the longest road leads to the highest place. Clint Eastwood spent 40 years being told he wasn't good enough. On March 29, 1993, he finally silenced every doubter with 2 words that said everything. Thank you.